So I'll share a little bit of specific kind of inquiry practice that can be done when you feel that a protective psychological mechanism is activated. So the ego is basically a combination of various type of survival strategies or survival programs. And as long as the fundamental platform of self structure is intact, it appears like a coherent entity. So there are all these kind of multiple voices or aspects of the psychological self that are quite fragmented in the dualistic experience. So that's the experience of the narrative self and the emotional self, how it appears in a fettered form. So what happens when genuine awakening shift takes place is that some of this conditioning falls away, or you could say some of the self-images and narratives falls away from this complex structure, that is ceaselessly self-creating itself, that the ego is. So some of it falls away, but some root mechanisms and identities and narratives, they stay intact. So that's usually what happens after the first awakening shift, that this starts to become obvious after the honeymoon, that there's work to do, because now we are able to feel this type of psychological material in a completely different way, in a lot more unfiltered and unbuffered manner. And we are able to question, the fundamental aversion and grasping, which was previously operating unconsciously in our experience. So then when the deeper awakening shifts happen, like the shift to non-duality, the no self-realization, which basically means that the fundamental self-structure, identity structure dissolves. So that's a very specific kind of shift, that it's a very different experientially how it feels like. So now your whole psychological reality is suddenly like blasted in this wide open, groundless expanse that is quite dynamic and inconceivable and absolutely like boundless, without confines, without that type of structures that the psychological self used to have around itself to feel somehow safe. So that can feel terrifying. So that's why there often is experience of pure raw energy of fear in connection with the no self shift. And again, like a large part of the egoic programming falls away from here. So whatever is left after first awakening, this type of more surface level of structures, they are wiped out. But what remains are some root conditionings that first are very hard to detect or perceive or process, because everything is so undifferentiated and so ungraspable and so free and so kind of wild and beautiful in a way. But eventually, yeah, you will have to face these root control structures in the experience. Well, they're not really even structures, they are more like tendencies, attempts to control the experience. So at this point, the ego is no more an identity. there's no sense of self about it, but an aspect of the old egoic identity can emerge in this boundlessness in a way that it's very hard to understand what is happening. So it's an aspect of that old psychological self, but when that whole structure and complex psychology was still intact, these type of survival mechanisms, they were part of a kind of larger organisms, and they were somehow integrated, as a part of it, even that organism is kind of fragmented and dysfunctional, but still it's some sort of a weird complex of phenomena that gives a certain sense of buffer. The egoic identity, it gives a kind of buffer to its own material or something like that. The fundamental identity, it gives this buffer. So when that is gone and the whole structure is just kind of like violently demolished, then these exposed parts of the psyche can feel incredibly raw and exposed like this, because now it has nothing to ground itself. It cannot find anymore an identity to attach itself into and to form a coherent narrative with continuity. So what these remnants of the psychological protection or coping, what they now kind of desperately attempt to do is to find a platform that is not here anymore and to grasp, to kind of function, but they can't really function in this wide open spaciousness because there's nothing to hold on here. So then it's just this attempt to exercise control, like just out of habit, by these parts of the psyche that are now in the process of integration. So this kind of part of the psyche, it can be felt, for example, as a kind of anxiety and obsessive narrative loops, kind of like hyper-vigilance, something in us that is like deeply terrified and is expressing that terror through kind of attempting to understand reality and control it through understanding. So that can then happen through spiritual narratives or meaning making, or, well, any kind of narratives or meaning making. And often attempting to just bypass these type of narrative loops, or to get rid of them, it's going to cause kind of violent reaction in the system, because now we are kind of starting to resist this type of psychological mechanism that is already a form of resistance, right? That's what it basically is. But if we are resisting resistance, it's only going to amplify it. So sending a message to this part of the psyche that appears like disturbing thoughts or narratives or images or grasping or fixation. So sending a message that, hey, this is wrong. I want you to go away. I don't want these thoughts to appear. I want them to stop. That's going to make this mechanism in us even more terrified, because it's a very primitive part of, I would say, human biology to have an ego in the first place. And at this point, it's purely a biological mechanism. And it's already terrified that the whole system has been like, kind of like, from its perspective, it's destroyed by the awakening. So awakening has happened, and all these like nice buffers and comfortable self-images and filters and all the numbness around it that used to make it feel that it was part of some sort of organism, it is all gone. And now only thing there is left is this type of like root survival programming, like just spinning in emptiness. And it doesn't need destruction at this point. Like destruction has already happened. The self-construct has already been demolished. So now you need to shift into a very different type of activity, like in order to engage with these parts of the psyche. So this type of general mainstream non-dual talk, which is kind of very violent towards the mind, which is constantly giving this message that, you know, it's very bad to have thoughts and it's very bad to believe thoughts and you should somehow get rid of your thoughts, or if the awakening happens, it means you should just have a peaceful mind. And so this kind of talk is just bullshit, and it's just gonna make this process at this point feel confusing because it doesn't make sense. So drop it completely. There's nothing wrong in these aspects of the psyche that are spinning in the void. They're not a mistake. They're actually intelligent in their own way. So we need to, first of all, like recognize that, hey, they are serving a purpose. They have function, you know, in our human psychology, and we need to see what is the function. They are kind of like guardians. So you need to honor the guardian in order to, you know, work with them and to see what are they actually guarding, right? They have a function. They are not random. So this is the first step in this type of inquiry that I'm suggesting in this video, is that first of all, you fully offer unconditional acceptance to that part of the psyche that is playing out, whatever it is, like anxiety, obsession, hyper-vigilance, paranoia, hostility, defensiveness. You know, you don't even need to name it clearly or define it, but you just have a somatic sense of it, how it feels like. Use some words that you get a sense of what are you actually engaging with, and then you offer it unconditional acceptance to be here and assure it that, you know, you're not trying to get rid of it, you're not trying to fix it through non-dual strategies. Like you are here to just be genuinely present with it and to be open to receive its wisdom. So that's the first step. And the second step, when you start to like somatically relax into your experience, you know, you're honoring the guard, you're honoring its function, and now you're curious about its function. Like, hey, like what are you actually protecting? Like what is it that needs this type of protection, this type of defense around itself? So usually some sort of like raw psychic vulnerable material in us. Again, you don't need to define it, you don't need to understand it, but feel it directly in your experience. Like, how does it feel like, you know, this type of space in us that is maybe fragile and you know, maybe terrified to be exposed through these awakening shifts and that needs protection. And now you are offering protection from this place of unconditional presence. You know, so you are honoring the guard, but you're also kind of bringing this lucid observation that it's not necessarily needed anymore to have this type of you know, guardedness around it. You know, the psychological protection mechanism has done its job the best it could, you know, and now you are offering a different kind of safety and protection that is unconditional, because the habitual conditioned protection mechanism is mechanical. So there happens something very interesting there when the unconditioned meets a conditioned response. And, you know, we see that, hey, we're actually, it's all like one mind just functioning here. So a kind of unification can happen there, a kind of like recognition, like, hey, like the mind recognizes itself in the mind, like it's actually nothing other. It's just, you know, the conditioned response is a kind of frozen, repetitive form of the same mind that is innately free and awake and self-liberating. So when this recognition takes place, then this aspect of our psychology, it can relax, in this primordial ground that is deeply unconditional. It's like a mother, it's just unconditionally, it's beyond acceptance, it's just it doesn't have any kind of judgment. It's indiscriminate like that, and that's what it really needs. That part of our psychological self that it's been like performing this function. It needs this kind of love that is unconditional, and then it can relax and it can start to trust that, hey, like maybe I don't need to anymore uh, defend, the inner core of my being like this is not necessarily anymore. It served a function in the past, but now it's not needed anymore. So I can relax. I can trust that this unconditional space is by its nature fiercely protective. So so when you do this type of inquiry, it's really crucial that you constantly stay in touch, like um, with the sensations through somatic tracking. So this is not intellectual inquiry, and but this is profoundly liberating because you are practicing here the insight of anatta, no self, and the insight of emptiness, but in a way that I would say is more feminine. It's very intuitive and very much honoring the wisdom of the trauma, the wisdom of our psychology, the wisdom of our embodied experience. But it's also willing to be kind of fiercely honest, about any kind of self-deception that might be occurring there. So, and that's the freedom that's available after the no self shift, when there is no egoic identity, that we don't need to, shield ourselves anymore against the knowledge, against liberation. Knowledge, I mean, here in the form of gnosis, because the ego is terrified of gnosis. So, this type of space, it's very potent. It's uncontainable, and you cannot restrict it. You can never reduce it to a strategy, that the ego then will try to perform in the form of spiritual practice. Like that's hubris. But that's what's just happening. So, like within spirituality, that these type of teachings emerge, uh, and they emerge from direct realization, like throughout history, and then they are co-opted by systems and patriarchal lineages and like all kind of doctrinal agendas, and then they become just kind of tools, tools for the identity, or it's just forms of conceptual knowledge and intellectual understanding that's like very removed from the actuality of the living realization. Like that is just so like unpredictable and unknowable, and that keeps you in such a vulnerable place and such a raw place where this heart opening is no longer a choice or an option. It's just what awakening does in our system, that it clears space for this type of emptiness that is profoundly healing and profoundly liberating. Like it functions with utter precision And sometimes you need to exert effort, and sometimes you need to release effort. And, there's not any one way that reality is. That's the thing. So that's why it's beyond mind's comprehension, like what it is. Like it can't be understood the way this functions. The instant you reduce it into any kind of statement that this is it, it's not. Next moment, it's going to be something else. And then if you try to superimpose upon it some, attempts to understand, it's always just going to show you that, no, this is inconceivable. This is wildly unknowable. This is infinitely humbling and infinitely dignified at the same time. Like it's a self-generating wisdom mind. So when you find confidence in that, that's the kind of stability and the kind of self-esteem that is indestructible, but it's completely without identity. So it has really nothing to do with conventional ways of understanding confidence or practice or path, freedom. There's nothing for the self in this freedom. And yet there is constant sanctification through that sacrifice that is profoundly mysterious and redemptive. It's like you are ceaselessly reborn in this unborn presence.